Good day, everyone. Welcome to Black Logic. European leaders press Trump for solid Ukraine guarantees as Zelensky seeks NATO-level backing without U.S. boots on the ground. Trump vows to ban mail-in ballots and voting machines via executive order ahead of 2026, stirring legal and constitutional uproar. Now, despite pledging homicide and carjacking rates, D.C. faces media panic over crime stats. Is it perception or political spin? We're going to cover that. The U.S. revokes over 6,000 student visas for overstays, crimes, and alleged terrorist ties amid intensified immigration scrutiny. A local cop caught by ICE for visa overstay and alleged firearm purchase gets court-approved exit, fueling E-Verify debate. We're going to cover all these things. And also, let's go over and really define and have a very comprehensive breakdown of what white supremacy, scratch white supremacy, what white privilege is in America. Europe's calling, and what they're saying is very, very serious. After huddling with Zelensky at the White House, leaders from the UK, France, Germany, and beyond are flooding the table. And they're pressing Washington for real security guarantees for Ukraine. No more vague promises. They think that NATO-style assurances or reassurances force without U.S. troops. Now, Trump's open to it, but he's treading very lightly because Putin not confirming anything. It's hard to say who's calling, who's bluff. And again, why are always the European nations calling for U.S. troops, calling for U.S. military, for our soldiers to be in harm's way, let alone this is a Eastern European country. You guys are right there on basically the same landmass, this kind of the colonial lines you guys divided yourself by and said that is your country. But nonetheless, once you guys put troops on the ground, again, we're talking about France, the UK, which in the UK is what, 4 or 5 countries? I don't know. Germany and all these other European countries, put troops on the ground and force Putin's hand for a ceasefire, force Putin's hand for a peace treaty. Because again, Donald Trump stated just the other day that Putin is ready to end the war today. Putin is ready to end the war tomorrow, but he wants Crimea and a promise and an agreement that Ukraine will never join NATO. So again, you give up a piece of land, you sign a piece of paper. It's a possibility that this war will be over forever. But given Putin's history, I know that Zelensky's thinking that's unlikely. And me personally, with the things you've heard about the guy, you dislike or like, but we do know the historical facts that whatever Putin says is not whatever Putin's going to do. So again, I understand why he's taking that with a grain of salt. Now, Trump's shaking things up right here in America. When it comes to the voting lanes, he's promising an executive order to eliminate mail-in ballots and voting machines before the 2026 midterm. Said they're insecure and inaccurate. But hold up, mail-in voting isn't just an American quirk. Places like Canada, the UK, Germany use it as well. Plus, the constitutional scholars agree that power lies with states and Congress and not the president. Expect lawsuits that's going to come from this. And when I'm thinking about this particular story, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to eradicate, eliminate, take away mail-in ballots, then what is the replacement for people who may be in their right minds but doesn't have the physical ability to show up at a lot of these voting booths or these these voting mail locations where they can actually vote? Again, this is to really decrease the amount of people who are going to come out and voting, in my opinion, unless you're going to use some, eye retina where you're going to send a government approved piece of equipment using biometrics in some degrees. And I know a lot of you, that can be hacked and that can be manipulated and that can be, it's very difficult to do those things. Okay. I know we see a lot of spy movies where someone's fingerprint is on the glass and you take a piece of tape and you uplift that fingerprint and then you can apply it somewhere else and then it can be scanned and that's the person. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to do that for hundreds of thousands of people just to vote yourself in for power, then go ahead. I mean, you should probably at that point deserve it. I mean, are they going to call it biometrics gate or fingerprint gate or eye gate? I don't know what they're going to call it. But again, if you're going to take away mail-in ballots, my opinion is my question is, what are you going to do to replace it? What is another apparatus, another method about helping those who cannot come in to these voting locations to actually vote? Or is this just a strategy to decrease the amount of people that are going to vote? Again, I don't know. I'm just asking questions. And I believe that we all should be asking questions when you're doing things of this manner. Because I know a lot of people are going to come out, well, the Democrats used mail-in ballots and they was forging. It was dead people voting and this, that, and the other. Donald Trump still won. And if my recollection serves me correct, he not only won, the electoral vote, but he also won the popular vote. So, I mean, it was a landslide. Look at the government in its current condition. I mean, all three levels of the government are majority GOP or more majority Republican. So again, whatever the Democrats allegedly done or have done, it didn't work. It did not work because again, people will tell you that a lot of foundational Black Americans either didn't vote or they voted for Donald Trump just so Kamala Harris wouldn't get into office, because we understand the undermining of Black Americans through illegal and mass legal immigration does hurt the Black American community. Absolutely. Again, we may not like to look at all stats, whether from a government entity or third party, but again, you cannot argue with the numbers. And believe me, the silent replacement or the great replacement is a real thing because we see it here today. We see it right here today. Now, DC crime numbers, ladies and gentlemen, are trending. But I really want to know what's happening because Trump says crime is sky high. But the data, homicides are down 32%. Carjackings are down 53%. Violent crime overall trending lower than it ever has before. Yet some still paint the city as a war zone for drama. The fact is yes, DC still has challenges, but it's not sprawling out of control the way some claim. I used to live in Anacostia. I used to live in Berry Farms where, I mean, there was a lot of crime, let me tell you. Okay. And I'm not trying to paint my people, but there was a lot of crime for various reasons. I don't want to give the historical references and what leads up to today. I think a lot of us already know. That's not the point of this particular video, because I can cover that as well. But then some people say, oh, you're just trying to give excuse for lawlessness and crime. No, there's a reason for everything. And it doesn't matter what country you're in. Low impoverished areas have more crime than people who are affluent, people who are in the middle to high and the 1% or so on and so forth, people who are well off, so to speak. That is the nature of the beast, ladies and gentlemen. But again, this so-called white European country, and again, as I stated yesterday, I understand we're not in Europe, but we understand the descendants of Europeans are running the country. The difference between America and its crime versus European countries and their lack of crime. Now, they have crime as well, but not at the same rate, not at the same level as America. Now, granted, we can do the whole statistical ratio of per capita. We have more people in America. And if you will break up France, Germany, UK, we have more people. But per capita, we still have more crime. Why is that? Well, here's a big difference. When the Europeans started the slave trade, this is not going to be long. I'm just going to give a quick synopsis of it. Okay, I may be missing a lot of things, but you'll get my point here. When Europeans started the slave trade, the only real country outside of Brazil, outside of the Caribbean, okay, that massive amount of, slaves were brought to was America. Roughly about 500,000. There were already black people in America prior to 1526. Okay. Given the historical reports and records of Vasquez, one of the Spanish conquistadors that came over. I digress. That's another bit for another video. But when the Europeans went to Africa, they colonized those Africans within the continent of Africa. They did take a few back to Europe, but not the massive amount that they had in Brazil and not the massive amounts that they had in America. So when the Europeans that quote unquote started the country here and named it America, once the foundational Black Americans built up this country, the roads, the buildings, the infrastructure, then you start hearing white supremacy ideology really start to spawn and state, go back to your own country after the work was already done. You see that? It's like someone who basically builds a house, never got paid for the house, and was allowed to stay, but all the while being tortured verbally, psychologically, and physically, and then told to go back to a country you never knew and you never really came from for thousands of years because your people were already here. And thus only 500,000 of your people were brought here by ships, roughly. The difference in between these European nations is that you already had black people here and you brought more black people here to do the work to build America versus the Europeans, okay, didn't take mass amount of Africans to Europe to build Europe. It was already somewhat built. So they colonized them for the resources within their own countries. So now you have a group of people who know that this is their land just as well, okay, as the so-called red-colored Native Americans that people say, no, you guys wasn't here. All of you guys came on slave ships. Again, that's another debate for another day. And then oppress them in their own land. And you want them to behave. You know what? We colonized this country. We made it safe for, we made it great for you guys to live. Look at the paved roads. You guys don't want to go back to Africa, do you? We never been to Africa. And if life all came from Africa, then we're all African. But if we've been here for thousands of years, we are a different group of people. You would never hear a person from Sudan saying they're Nigerian. You would never hear someone from Nigeria saying they're from, or they're South African, or they are Zulu, or any of the sort. Again, you can have the same racial people, but not the same group. Just as well, someone who is from Scotland wouldn't say they are British, and so on and so forth throughout all of Europe, as Asia as well. Again, I believe you guys know what I'm talking about. And again, I know somebody's going to say, oh, you're just giving excuses. I'm not. It's just the tell of the tape. And it is the truth. OK, I digress. Now, the State Department has yanked over 6,000 international student visas for overstay. And they're saying crime, and yes, some for support for terrorism. They're coming up with all sorts of reasons. Also, increased social media vetting is making the process more invasive. And the bottom line here, folks, is that this is big news for immigrant communities, universities, and civil liberties alike. And America has every right, again, America has every right to revoke and deny visas. This is not a right. These are not citizens of America. This is not a right. This is a privilege to allow people to come to the land of opportunity to not only get their education, and believe me when I tell you this, these people are not going to, they're not going back to their own countries and take their knowledge that they learned in America back to improve their own countries. No, they're wanting to go out here and get these six-figure jobs. See, here's the thing about what we need to understand about immigrant communities and people who are not American citizens. If you have a generation racial epidemic in America, and it is most pointed at foundational Black Americans, and then you tend to get along with other people, because when you look at us, you slave, you should go back to your other country. Thank you for building America, but that's all we're going to give you. No repudiation, no resolution, no reparations, no restoration, none of this sort. Anything started with RE, you're not getting it. But you need to go somewhere else. But we're bringing all these other people to do all these other jobs. See, we don't want to empower you because we don't look at you in the same light. History teaches us that you guys are the dumb N-words that we used to rape, dismember, make you guys fight against each other, take your women and children, split up your family, divide you guys, and do all sorts of atrocities. We don't want to be reminded of such things. So with that being said, we're bringing these other group of people and get these jobs where we'll see them each and every day. And we're fine with them because we barely know their history. We probably colonized them in some regards, but, it's not going to remind us of some of the treacherous things we did here in America, because that's what will happen to Black Americans. Again, this is my conjecture when it comes to this piece. If we decrease the amount of immigration when it comes to people who derive from Central and South America, if we decrease the amount of immigration that's coming out of the Caribbean and Africa and Asia, we will have more Black Americans in tech jobs. We will have more Black Americans in constructions. We will have more Black Americans in service jobs, because those opportunities will be more open and be more vast, and they will have to fill those vacant spots. Guess what that started to do? Governments on a state level will have to start programs to fill the void of tech jobs that we still want to be the powerhouse in, or Asians in Asia will outperform Americans. Now, granted, I know that we have a history of always recruiting around the world, the top talent around the world, because I guess America is feeling somewhat guilty, because how do you think we created nuclear bombs? Because we recruited and we secretly apprehended, detained, and gave Nazi scientists and researchers a better way in America so they can build our cryptology, so they can build our nuclear bombs and all other sorts of advancement when it comes to warfare, because they were good at it. So we changed some of their names. We hit a lot of their locations. We had certain missions and things that we just try to do so secretly, where eventually we know today that it all came out. Instead of empowering a group of people that's already here that have been doing the work for quite some time. But again, as the infrastructure got built up, they didn't want to hear no more from us. Absolutely not. Now, with the last news update here, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk Maine. Now, a reserve police officer named John Luke Evans was detained by ICE for overstaying his visa and allegedly trying to buy a firearm. Here's a twist. A judge granted him voluntary departure, no deportational record, and potential for legal return in the future. Now, the town trusted E-Verify and it cleared him, but now he's out. It's a human story tangled in the immigration policy, because they're giving him the illusion that he can return and probably retain his job. Because on one hand, the court has granted him voluntary departure. Then he also stated that I agree to leave because he believes that in probably 60 to 90 days, he's going to come back on a work visa and become a police officer once again. I just don't believe that's going to happen. I believe this is a way for them to, again, crack down on immigration, send him back to his country, and then when he applies for a work visa and stay to his previous status, they're just going to deny it. They already revoked 6,000 student visas. What do you think? You think you're going to get a visa? Now, granted, I could be wrong. But given the recent reports and recent actions of this administration, chances are you won't be back. Now, hopefully a Foundation Black American takes that job that he was in, because I do believe we need a stronger presence in police departments to withhold the law morally and ethically and not just shoot people because of their skin color or the illusion of a threat, even though he's unarmed, hands up, don't shoot. I digress, because in this next segment, I really want to break down something I've been wanting to really harp on for maybe, I think this is my second time covering this. Now, first, I just want to give you guys my breakdown of white privilege in America, because I don't think a lot of people really understand it. They believe that white people are not privileged because there's poor white people. But I really want you guys to imagine a black man walking down the street. He's pulled over for a broken tail light. We know how it goes. The situation escalates and it ends in tragedy. Now, across town, a white man, he storms the Capitol with a weapon and is escorted out unharmed. This is not a coincidence. It's not an anomaly. It's American history repeating itself in plain sight. And I want to just ask, whatever happened to Back the Blue during the January 6th insurrection, riot, protest, all of the above? You know my take on this, family. What happened to Back in the Blue? Because again, the police officer, the black one that shot, forgot the lady's name, that was trying to climb through the window, what was very clear sign of aggression to try to get into the chambers where the congressmen and women were, and he did his job. What about the white police officer or white police officers with an S that got brutalized, assaulted by the rioters and insurrectionists during the January 6th protests? What happened to those people? Donald Trump exonerated and cleared them all. They're all off. I don't believe anyone from the January 6th protest, insurrection, and riot is still incarcerated. It may be one or two people. But again, they demonized Back in the Blue when the black officer did his job, right? Because again, why are you trying to enter the chambers of the congressmen and women, even though you were told not to enter the property? And then they closed off these things. They closed off this picture. And here's another thing. The congressmen and women, they were hiding. So they were fearful. They were scared. You have hundreds of people outside storming the Capitol. I think I would be quite fearful myself. And the only protection that we have is a couple of Secret Service men, a couple of Capitol Police. And we already have reports that the police outside, they have their riot gear, and a lot of them are being harmed. Back to blue when it's only white on blue. It's very interesting. But I want to give my take here, because white privilege in America begins with chattel slavery, where whiteness itself became the standard for humanity and citizenship. And the Constitution, the 3/5 compromise, institutionalized that black lives were worth less while whiteness meant full representation. Because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 3/5 compromise. Some people allude to that, they only counted as 3/5 of a person. And the reason why they stated that is because for every 5 black people, they only counted 3 of them. Here's another thing. So if you had a plantation and you had 5 slaves, 3 of them will count as a vote. Count as 5 of them will only count as 3 votes. But then again, they couldn't vote. So that's why people say they only count as 3/5 of a person. I just want to make sure I lay that down very thick. Laws like the Naturalization Act of 1790 restricted citizenship to free white persons, laying the groundwork for generational advantage. Wealth was accumulated through free black labor while white families were able to build generational land ownership. Then we come to segregation, Jim Crow, and structural power, because in the 1930s, the federal government's Homeowners Loan Corporation created maps that marked Black neighborhoods as high risk just because they were Black. White families were given loans, Black families were locked out of home ownership, the single biggest source of generational wealth. And don't tell me that crime rates were high back in the 1930s amongst Black Americans, because it was not. There were some of the most peaceful communities in America. White schools received better funding, newer textbooks, and better teachers, while Black schools operated on scraps, even though they were paying taxes, ladies and gentlemen. And white offenders received leniency, while Black people faced mass incarceration that was exemplified by the war on drugs, which punished crack cocaine. You guys not listening? Which punished crack cocaine in Black neighborhoods far more harshly than powder cocaine used in white suburbs. They even classified powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. Oh, crack cocaine is more addictive, but how do you get crack cocaine? You have to have regular cocaine or powder cocaine, do you not? And I already explained this just yesterday of how the contradiction between the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic and how the government responded to each. Let's crack down on these thugs, these gangsters, these drugs pushers, these pimps, these hoes, drug users, etc. Let's throw them all in jail. Well, you have doctors, nurses, pharmaceutical agents, promoters of these opioids. No, let's create a legislation. Let's lock up a couple of people so the others get the hint, but let's provide resources for the families who have been harmed by this epidemic of opioids. Even though we have thousands of people that we know that actually wrote fraudulent, prescriptions for people to stay hooked to these drugs, because when I sell this particular opioid, and the more of these opioids that I sell, I get 25% kickback from the drug company. Even though we know that these people are addicted to the opioid, and a lot of their ailments and issues and problems and pain has already gone away. I told you about this, family. Now, I also want you guys to compare the police response to the Black Lives Matter protests, tear gas, rubber bullets, mass arrests, versus the January 6th Capitol riot where rioters were escorted out. All right, guys. All right, you guys being rowdy. All right, somebody got shot in there. All right, now it's enough. Even though you're climbing on the walls, you're taking dumps on politicians' desks, you are basically, this all-out riots within the Capitol. You're destroying government property. That's okay. Those things can be fixed. All right, you rambunctious bunch of you guys, let's get out of here. And the only thing Black Lives Matter, not the organization, the movement, it's a difference. I'm not talking about the organization that was about transgender and gays and all of that. No. That she took millions of dollars and bought homes around the country. You got a damn scam artist everywhere you go, do you not, Bernie Madoff? But anyway, they started to do counter protests that all lives matter. They do. All lives do matter. Kanye West and Candace Owens, when he was in Paris, France, wore White Lives Matter t-shirts. Yeah, White Lives Matter too. But that wasn't about the movement. It's just stating that we see that all these groups of people in America are being somewhat treated more fairly and more equal than Black people. And we've been killed by race soldiers with badges and white supremacist ideologists and all other sorts of people for various reasons, nonviolent reasons. A lot of them very unjustified. And we're just stating that, hey, our lives matter. That's it. But people didn't like it. Now, studies also show how Black patients receive less pain medication than white patients with the same conditions because they think that our pain tolerance is higher. Why? They think we have a third muscle in our calf, thus we jump higher. Oh, they got that third muscle in their calf. That's why they can jump higher. Really? So wait a minute, doesn't that contradict the 3/5 of a person? Because then we should be 5/6 of a person. We should be a little extra, should we not? Now, granted, when it comes to employment and wealth, a Black man with a college degree is statistically less likely to be hired than a white man with a high school diploma. We already know this. And the median wealth of white families is nearly 8 to 10 times greater than Black families. And white privilege also shows up in very small ways: shopping without being followed, living without fear of being racially profiled, having history books that reflect your image as the hero, and the eradication of history when it comes to textbooks so people don't feel guilty about the past. Oh, okay. And again, white privilege is not just personal bias. It's institutional advantages. It persists because American society was built to center whiteness. When it comes to laws, education, policing, economics, all structured to preserve it. Even when the laws change, when they sign legislation in civil rights as well as eroding acts, these structures still remain. Now, granted, you're going to have some Black people, Thomas Sowell, Candace Owens, the Hodge twins. I'm just naming a couple of people that I know that will really debate and contradict what I'm stating and go against what I'm stating. Not that I have anything against these people. I just know why they do the things that they do. Because speaking truth to power is not profitable. Let me say it again. Speaking truth to power is not profitable. If anything, it's the opposite. You can lose a couple of dollars. Now, when you start speaking to power in the tone, verbiage that promotes and make them seem better than what they are, that can be very profitable. Now, granted, white privilege doesn't mean that white people don't struggle. Again, white privilege does not mean that white people don't struggle. It means race is not an additional obstacle. You get that? I know that white people struggle, but the one thing that is sometimes the determining factor is race is not an obstacle. See, Black communities fight double battles. We fight against poverty and against systems designed to block them. And true justice means dismantling the invisible scaffolding of whiteness that America was built upon. It didn't start with police sirens. It didn't start with college admissions. It started on stolen land with a stolen people. And through generations, white privilege evolved, not just as an idea, but as a system, and a system that doesn't require intent to cause harm. Only inertia to keep working. But maybe I'm not the right face to tell a story. In order to inform and or manipulate groups of people, you have to have people that look like them because other people, they just won't convince them. Like me speaking to you guys, if you're white, Asian, Hispanic, it may not come off the same way if I was white. You may be more inclined to accept it. You may become more of a sponge versus a brick. So with that being said, I'll let somebody else with some of you guys' familiar skin tones to break this down even more so.
Because if you know the history of the whole concept of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland. Highlanders and lowlanders just fought the hell out of each other. So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured like many poor Europeans for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. Whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't want to kill them all. You had to do the work yourself. You had to build your own levee, build your own house. No, pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all, we're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination, but we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy, not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the West. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then,
it was about Southern pride.
And they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No, they're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it, if I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low income person. But they were told, if these people are freed, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border? Is that really what we believe? We know that if that border is closed, it isn't going to be closed to capital. It isn't going to be closed to goods. If you have a border that can be crossed by capital looking for the highest return on investment or goods looking for the highest price, but labor is chained to its country of origin, how is that going to work to the benefit of working people? By definition, it doesn't. By definition, it immiserates the working class. Divide and conquer. But the best example of all, perhaps, in the contemporary era, in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina. Here you have two communities that were the most hard hit. Lower Ninth Ward, mostly black community, 94% African American, about 40% official poverty rate, heavy working class community. And right across the canal, St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, 95% white, also working class, high levels of poverty, economically very similar. And at the end of the day, in those first few days of September 2005, more similar than they probably would have realized. Because when those levees broke, they all got their stuff jacked. They all got their stuff destroyed. But if you had asked white folks in Chalmette, and I've done it, who was the cause of the problems in the greater New Orleans area prior to that flooding, they would have pointed across that canal at those black folks, wouldn't have called them black folks, and would have said, there, that's the problem. 70% of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the irony? The irony is that while they were blaming black people for their problems, while they were blaming black people for the conditions of the greater New Orleans area in which they lived, nobody was paying attention, least of all they, to the fact that these white elite politicians, either in Baton Rouge or in Washington, whose job it was to secure those levees, to make sure that levy funds were spent in the proper way and that they were spent at all, those mostly white and mostly elite politicians did nothing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just the black folks in the lower Ninth Ward they didn't care about. They really couldn't have given a rat's ass about those poor and working class white folks either. And yet, when the people of Chalmette, people of St. Bernard Parish got back into session, first time they had a city council meeting, parish council meeting after the flooding, the lights aren't even on yet. The water isn't even hooked up. And the first order of business was to pass an ordinance saying that you couldn't rent property in St. Bernard Parish to anyone who wasn't a blood relative. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before. But now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a damn good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that, that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply. You can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now, they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatening, they got rid of the ordinance. But my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time and march on Baton Rouge and march on DC and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
That was a wonderful breakdown of white privilege and how the elites trick lower class whites. And we see that today, ladies and gentlemen, when you have, and I don't want to make, even though it's political, because again, based upon the laws, legislation that have occurred, of how a lot of low income class whites voted for Donald Trump, even though he said he's going to do most when it comes to economics for the top 10% of Americans, which in regards to still white. So when we look at this breakdown that Tim Wise just did, it kind of reminds me of the Bacon's Rebellion of 1676, where black and white indentured servants rebelled together And the response, laws were passed that gave poor whites small social advantages, land rights, and access to militias while permanently enslaving Black people. Now, this was the invention of a race as a legal structure, even though this kind of started off back in the late 1400s by one of the popes that really classified dark colored melanated skinned people as slaves. And they took that same ideology to the Americas. But this is how they divided the working class solidarity, because enslaved people were counted as 3/5 for white representation, no voice, no rights. Yet our bodies helped white landowners gain more congressional power. We had all sorts of indigenous displacement. Genocide led to the Homestead Act of 1862, which gave millions acres of land to white settlers, the origin of generational wealth. So as I look at what he just stated and what goes on even today, because white privilege today isn't just about what's given, but it's about what's taken away. Think about it. A white teen caught with marijuana, slap on the wrist. A Black teen charged as an adult. That's usually how it is. A white man protesting lockdown with a gun, seen as a patriot. A Black man protesting injustice, seen as a threat. And we're referencing college admissions. Wealthy white students use legacy status, not grades. Oh, they're just not smart enough. That's why they're not going to Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Brown. No, they use legacy status, a system rooted in historical white-only access to gain entry into elite schools. Then, in referencing corporate America, white-sounding names get 50% more callbacks. They just did a little special. Someone did a special, I believe it was either on YouTube, X, or TikTok, of how they used a Black name or a Black sounding name, no hits, no pings, no callbacks. Changed his name to a white person's name, called back, email the same day. So that's why a lot of Black folks stop naming their children, I would like to believe, Lil Day, Lil Ronjo. They started naming them names like John Brown, things of that nature. And again, it just depends on sometimes your economic level, sometimes your environment, sometimes your community. Sometimes we have these subset cultures in Black society. Depends on what you've been called or what your name. White privilege doesn't mean your life hasn't been hard, because that's what at times when you speak about white privilege, white people will always defend the notion that they struggle, that their life has been hard. Again, white privilege doesn't mean your life has been hard. It means your skin color hasn't been one of the things that's making it harder. White people today, not back when you had the Irish and you had all these different subsects of Europeans here, where they, in some regards, the Italians, the Irish, the British would discriminate amongst each other. You don't have that today. So there's no racial color barrier when it comes for a white person applying for a job that could be qualified and a Black person applying for a job that could be more qualified. I just did this for you guys because, again, hopefully understanding white privilege isn't about guilt. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. If the system was designed in the way that it is today, that means that it can be redesigned. But it cannot be redesigned if we continue to believe that it doesn't exist.